After her billionaire husband's sudden death, a pregnant wife breaks down until a CEO steps in. Beneath the dazzling lights of an opulent Manhattan skyline, Isabella Hawthorne's fairy tale life shattered in a heartbeat. Once the adored wife of billionaire philanthropist Damian Hawthorne, she carried not only his child, but also the weight of their shared dreams until his untimely death left her alone and inconsolable. Rumors swirled around the tragedy, and speculation about her future electrified the gossip columns. As Isabella struggled with grief and looming financial complexities, a new figure emerged, Julian Astor, a charismatic CEO determined to protect her from ruin. In the throes of heartbreak, Isabella stood at the crossroads of sorrow and hope, never suspecting just how drastically her life would change. Isabella Hawthorne née Dupree felt the chilly autumn air bite at her cheeks as she stepped onto the marble balcony of her Upper East Side penthouse. The New York skyline sprawled before her, a reminder of how much her life had changed in the last 2 years. She recalled the day Damian Hawthorne, heir to the vast Hawthorne family fortune, swept her off her feet. It had been at a charity gala for environmental conservation. He'd been charming, self-assured, yet oddly gentle in the way he spoke to her. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a grand wedding, replete with media coverage, labeling her the Cinderella bride. For most of the world, their union resembled a fairy tale. Damian, a brilliant financier and philanthropist, was revered for his bold investments and philanthropic endeavors. Isabella, a former art curator with a modest upbringing in Ohio, had quickly adapted to the social expectations of a billionaire's wife. She'd flitted between exclusive dinners, charity committees, and designers eager to clothe her in runway pieces. While the transition felt surreal, she relished the chance to share Damian's philanthropic passions, especially the Hawthorne Foundation, dedicated to education and environmental causes. Rumors occasionally blazed that her marriage was purely transactional, a beautiful woman of simple origins wedded to an older, fabulously wealthy man. Yet, behind closed doors, Isabella experienced more than just extravagance. Damian, 15 years her senior, treated her with respect, seeking her input on everything from art acquisitions to donation strategies. He was a complex figure, capable of intense focus and drive, but also tender and playful in private moments. She couldn't deny the passion they shared. That night, Isabella stood alone on the balcony because Damian was out attending a late meeting. She felt a roiling mix of anticipation and nerves. That very morning, she had discovered she was pregnant. Overjoyed, she anxiously waited for Damian's return to share the life-changing news. They talked often of having children, even picking out hypothetical names, if the day ever came. She imagined his reaction, a triumphant grin, tearful eyes, and her heart fluttered. But as midnight approached, she received a call that changed everything. The voice on the other end, a hospital official, spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "Miss S. Hawthorne, your husband's been in an accident. You should come immediately." Her world blurred. She dashed for her coat, ignoring the staff's worried questions, adrenaline surging through her veins. She couldn't grasp the weight of those words. At the hospital, bright fluorescent lights and the scent of antiseptic corridors assaulted her senses. Every step felt heavy with dread. Doctors rushed to intercept her. They tried to speak gently, but the message was brutal. Damian had suffered a sudden cardiac episode at the wheel of his car. He died en route to the hospital. The shocking finality sent Isabella to her knees, her mind reeling. She clutched her belly, realizing the fragile new life inside her would never meet its father. In the swirling chaos of medical staff, police clarifications, and weeping confidants, Isabella felt her illusions of safety crumble. Before dawn broke, she found herself alone in a sterile waiting room, heart pounding, tears running dry, The man she loved, the one who anchored her in a world of opulence, had vanished in a single catastrophic moment. And though she was certain she carried part of him in her womb, she feared the darkness of widowhood and the secrets she knew could arise in circles of immense wealth. The days following Damian's sudden death blurred in a haze of condolences, floral arrangements, and official procedures. Grief-stricken, Isabella barely managed to eat or sleep, haunted by nightmares of that phone call. The tabloids exploded with coverage, splashing tragic end for billionaire Damian Hawthorne across front pages. Camera flashes outside her penthouse documented every tearful appearance, fueling speculation on how she would cope. She buried Damian in an intimate funeral attended by the who's who of Manhattan CEOs, socialites, a senator or two. Eulogies praised him as a visionary investor, a champion of charity, a caring husband. Isabella, draped in black, stood stoic by the casket, feeling numb while acquaintances patted her shoulder. While she recognized some faces, many were strangers who leveraged the funeral for networking. The hypocrisy sickened her. In private moments, she collapsed from heartbreak. She kept replaying the memory of discovering she was pregnant mere hours before his death. The unfairness crushed her. She wished she had told him earlier that day. Maybe he would have driven more carefully, or seen a doctor if he felt ill. Sleepless nights were spent in their sprawling bedroom, his scent still clinging to pillows where every object recalled moments of their life together. To make matters worse, her late husband's associates descended like vultures. His hawk-eyed lawyer, Edgar Rosenblum, demanded immediate estate meetings. There were significant assets and business ventures that needed management, he insisted. Though Edgar tried to appear courteous, Isabella sensed an undercurrent of urgency. Perhaps some corner of Damian's empire teetered on instability. She dreaded these obligations, longing to vanish into her grief. It was at one such estate meeting she realized just how complicated her situation might become. Sitting around a glossy oak conference table, Edgar explained that while Damian's will named her a principal beneficiary, certain business partnerships weren't straightforward. There were shares in Hawthorne Capital, sprawling real estate deals, philanthropic trusts, as well as rumored unfinalized deals. In short, everything was in flux. Several board members eyed her warily, uncertain if a young widow and an outsider at that could handle the complexities. Rumors about her pregnancy wove through the hush of corporate corridors. She overheard whispers that she might not even remain in control of Hawthorne Capital. There were disclaimers in the legal documents about major shareholders, possible buyouts, and an entire labyrinth of financial tangles. That afternoon, after hours of draining discussions, Isabella returned to the penthouse with an intense headache. The staff, wanting to be supportive, lined up to greet her with sympathetic nods. She retreated to her bedroom, craving solitude. She couldn't reconcile the heartbreak of losing Damian with the sudden, terrifying possibility that she might lose everything he'd built too. Curled up on the bed, a wave of dizziness overcame her. Her unborn child anchored her sanity, the knowledge that she carried a piece of Damian. But how would she protect that child if the empire around her collapsed, or if unscrupulous figures tried to exploit her ignorance about high-stakes business? She sensed looming troubles and dreaded the moment any cracks in the Hawthorne empire would become public knowledge. One cold afternoon, about a week after the funeral, the penthouse doorman announced a visitor, a certain Julian Astor, CEO of Astor International. Isabella recognized the name. Julian was a rising star in the corporate world, rumored to have turned a small energy firm into a global powerhouse through strategic acquisitions. She had met him briefly at one of the Hawthorne charity balls, though they had barely exchanged pleasantries. Curious, she summoned the courage to greet him in the living room. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands folded politely in front of him. Tall and clean-cut, he exuded quiet confidence. His gaze softened when she approached. "Still wearing black, Mrs. Hawthorne," he said gently. "My condolences. I'm sorry we have to meet under such circumstances." A bit guarded, Isabella gestured for him to sit. "Thank you, Mr. Astor. Please call me Isabella." She forced a small smile, uncertain of his intentions. With so many business people swirling around, she feared another pushy offer or attempt to manipulate her. Julian explained that he had known Damian in a professional capacity. They'd occasionally discussed potential partnerships. He admitted he'd been shocked by Damian's death, having admired his philanthropic devotion. Then he paused, voice growing softer. "I also learned you're expecting." She stiffened. "Yes," she murmured. Not many people know yet. The tabloids speculated, but she hadn't confirmed publicly. He offered a respectful nod. "I only mention it because, in a sense, that child is Hawthorne's rightful heir. I mean no intrusion. But I heard whispers that some of Damian's business associates might attempt to dethrone you, so to speak, from controlling Hawthorne Capital. I want to ensure you're aware of your rights and not blindsided." Her heartbeat quickened. The cynic in her questioned whether this was some angle of self-interest, but his concern felt genuine. Isabella swallowed. "Yes, there's been tension. I don't know the details, but I sense people want me sidelined." Julian's expression turned solemn. "I can't say I was extremely close to your husband, but I respected him. If you ever need guidance navigating these corporate waters, I'd be happy to help. I'm not after any pieces of the Hawthorne empire. I have my own path, but I dislike seeing exploitation." Isabella found herself unexpectedly moved. Since Damian's death, few had offered sincere support beyond formal condolences. She recognized the risk in trusting an outsider, but Julian's straightforwardness gave her a glimmer of hope. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But why would you help me, a near stranger?" He let out a faint smile. "Because I lost my father at a young age, and I remember how quickly vultures circle. I see something in you, someone who's mourning, but also carrying a heavy responsibility. I believe you and your child deserve better than a corporate power grab." Emotion stung her eyes. She was so used to cynicism that altruism felt foreign. "I appreciate your concern," she whispered, hands fidgeting in her lap. "But I'm not sure what I can do." Julian leaned forward, tone calm. "Start by attending the next Hawthorne Capital Board meeting. Familiarize yourself with the bylaws, the will, and your legal entitlements. Show them you won't be dismissed. If you want, I can have my legal team quietly review your documents purely to advise, with no strings attached." Isabella hesitated, trusting a newly arrived CEO with sensitive information was risky. Yet, thinking of her unborn child's future, she realized doing nothing was even more perilous. Summoning a trembling breath, she nodded. "I'd be grateful, Mr. Astor." "Julian," he corrected gently. Then, offering her a thoughtful card with contact details, he stood to leave. "Take some time to decide. My door's open whenever you're ready." Long after he departed, Isabella gazed at the city lights, heart pounding with a mix of uncertainty and relief. The presence of Julian Astor suggested she might not have to face the labyrinth of high finance alone. Yet, with every step into the business realm, the memory of Damian's absence cut deeper. She vowed silently to protect their child from any corporate maelstrom. If that meant forging alliances with unexpected allies, so be it. In the weeks that followed, Isabella forced herself to adapt, attending a series of Hawthorne Capital Board sessions where her presence garnered polite smiles but veiled condescension. Most board members were older men who had served under Damian for years. They doubted Isabella's knowledge about complex holdings. She noticed how they spoke over her, dismissing concerns with flowery language. It infuriated her, though she kept a poised facade. Her biggest shock came during a meeting with Roderick Vale, head of one of Hawthorne's largest real estate divisions. As she tried asking about the rumored losses in the European sector, Vale smoothly changed the subject, brushing off her inquiry. "We're handling it internally. Miss S. Hawthorne, no need to trouble yourself with complicated details," he purred. The paternalistic tone made her bristle. Afterward, alone in Damian's old office, she rummaged through his files. She discovered partial documents referencing a distressed property investment in Berlin. If these rumors were true, the firm might face a significant financial shortfall. She realized the men were intentionally hiding certain vulnerabilities. If public, these shortcomings could reduce Hawthorne Capital's stock value, thereby threatening her child's inheritance. Worn down by the deception, Isabella dialed Julian's number. She told him about the Berlin property fiasco and the board's stonewalling. He listened quietly, then suggested meeting at a neutral location, an upscale cafe near Central Park. She slipped out discreetly the next morning, wearing a simple coat and scarf, hoping to avoid paparazzi. They sat at a corner table, the aroma of espresso mingling with the crisp air. Julian studied her with concern. "It sounds like they're trying to maintain an illusion of stability until they can shift blame or orchestrate a bailout," he said. Damian's death might have accelerated their power plays." Isabella's voice trembled. "I can't let them run the company into the ground. My child, it's his or her legacy at stake." Julian leaned forward. "There's a simpler approach. You can use the shares bequeathed to you. According to New York corporate law, you hold a significant voting stake in Hawthorne Capital, right?" She nodded. "Yes, but I'm still finalizing the legal transfer. And if the Berlin fiasco reveals too big a hole, I might lose everything anyway." He frowned. "We can't let that happen. Let me quietly instruct one of my business analysts to evaluate the Berlin situation. If it's salvageable, or if a restructuring is needed, you can step in with a real plan. Then the board will see you're not a naive figurehead." Her eyes widened. "You'd do that?" He gave a gentle smile. "I told you I don't like vultures. Let's make them realize you're not to be trifled with." Their conversation continued, a synergy forming between them. She realized Julian was offering not just expertise, but moral support. It warmed her heart, though a pang of guilt surfaced, would letting him into Hawthorne's affairs betray Damian's memory. By the time they parted, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She clutched a binder of notes he'd given her, gleaning from his knowledge of corporate turnaround strategies. For once, since Damian's passing, Isabella walked away from a meeting with a spark of optimism. Yet, as she headed back to the penthouse, a swirl of press cameras flared on the sidewalk. She recognized a few faces from gossip tabloids. They snapped photos of her and demanded to know, "Is it true you're seeking help from Julian Astor? Are you dating Mrs. Hawthorne?" The barrage stunned her. She managed to slip inside the building, heart pounding. She realized how quickly the media would spin this. If the tabloids portrayed her as fraternizing with another powerful CEO soon after her husband's death, it could stoke scandal and overshadow her rightful claims to Hawthorne Capital. Alone in the elevator, tears pricked her eyes. She whispered to herself, "It's for the child," vowing not to let rumor mongers derail her from saving Damian's legacy. Only time would tell whether forging an alliance with Julian would bring deliverance or spark a new wave of chaos. Within days, tabloids ran headlines screaming, "Widowed heiress Isabella Hawthorne seen with rival CEO Julian Astor scandal or support." Frenetic speculation filled social media, fueling conspiracies that she was betraying Damian's memory for a new love interest. The paparazzi hounded her wherever she went outside the penthouse, arriving at Hawthorne Capital, even trailing her car to routine doctor appointments. Overnight, her once sympathetic public image of a grieving widow became murky. Online trolls spewed vitriol, gold digger, moving on too fast. The baby might not even be Damian's. The cruelty stung, though she tried to ignore it. In a heated meeting, Edgar Rosenblum, the Hawthorne family lawyer, demanded an explanation for these Astor rumors. "Miss Hawthorne," he hissed, adjusting his spectacles, "the board is livid. They think you're consorting with a competitor. This could undermine confidence in your leadership." She clenched her fists. "Julian Astor is offering help to analyze a potential crisis in Berlin. That's it." Rosenblum frowned. "I urge caution. Perception is everything. If the Berlin fiasco emerges publicly and you appear compromised by a competitor, the board might attempt to strip you of any controlling influence. We can't let the brand get tarnished." Exhaustion weighed on Isabella. She felt the press relentless, the board distrustful, and her personal sorrow unrelenting. Then she recalled Julian's reassurance. They needed a real plan, something to present the board with so they'd realize her seriousness. She asked Rosenblum if he had any updates on the official estate settlement. He replied that it was still in progress, but from a legal standpoint, she did have a strong claim to a controlling share. She just had to avoid fueling the board's narrative that she was incompetent. That evening, she nearly broke down in the penthouse's library. Surrounded by the relics of Damian's interests, rare books, philanthropic awards, she realized how alone she was. She placed a protective hand over her belly, the baby's presence her only solace. Reaching for her phone, she texted Julian, "Media is twisting this. Maybe we should keep our alliance quiet." He replied swiftly, "Agreed. Let's strategize a private plan. Don't lose heart. I've got your back." In that moment, she felt a flicker of gratitude. She had no illusions that Julian was some flawless savior. He was still a powerful businessman with his own ambitions. But his sincerity and respect offered hope in a sea of opportunists. If she could just maintain composure and finalize this plan to save the Berlin property, the board might see her as a rightful figurehead. Yet, she also feared how far the board might go to maintain their grip on power. She wondered if certain members might sabotage her baby's inheritance. The thought was chilling, fueling her determination to stand firm. She decided to press forward, dealing with the media storm in whatever way possible, refusing to yield to the malicious rumors. Amid the swirling media chaos, Isabella found fleeting comfort in her growing bond with Julian, at least in a professional sense. Late-night calls and clandestine lunches became their norm, during which they pored over financial data about the Berlin investment. Julian's analysts discovered that the troubled property could be salvaged by injecting fresh capital and rebranding it from a failing shopping complex into a tech-driven office hub. If timed correctly, it could yield a modest profit instead of a ruinous loss. Excitement flickered in Isabella's eyes as they set about drafting a formal proposal. "If we present this plan to the Hawthorne board," she reasoned, "they'll see I'm not just a clueless widow. I can lead the company out of a crisis." But that confidence soon took a hit. One evening, returning to her penthouse after a routine prenatal checkup, she stepped off the elevator only to find Roderick Vale waiting in the hallway. She froze, unsettled by his presence. He greeted her with a tight smile. "Miss S. Hawthorne, I wanted to speak privately," he said, voice dripping with polite menace. He gestured to the corridor. "It seems you're moving dangerously close to forging alliances outside our circle. The board won't stand for it." She squared her shoulders. "My alliances are my business, Mr. Vale. I'm simply ensuring the company's future." His gaze flicked to her belly. "We respect your position," he said, tone chilly, "but you must realize that if you bring in an outsider like Astor, you risk undervaluing the brand. Some of us might question your ability to remain in control, especially with a child on the way." Her heart pounded. "Threatening a pregnant woman? That's low, even for you." He gave a thin smile. "We're only concerned, Mrs. Hawthorne. You're vulnerable right now. Let us handle the complexities. Step aside gracefully, and your child can still inherit a tidy sum. Otherwise, if the Berlin fiasco leaks, the stock plummets, you could see that inheritance shrivel." She felt fury rise in her chest. "So that's it? Intimidation to make me back down?" Vale shrugged. "We prefer you remain the sympathetic figure. Let the board do what's needed to maintain stability. No need for scandal or Astor's meddling." With that, he strolled away, leaving her stunned. She realized the board might be more cutthroat than she'd imagined. They'd do anything to retain control, even sabotage a viable plan if it meant reaffirming their power. She hurried into the penthouse, tears of anger and frustration welling. Seconds later, her phone buzzed. She half expected more tabloids, but it was Linda Greenwood, her old friend from her art curator days, one of the few who stuck by her. Isabella spilled the entire story of Vale's threat, feeling the baby tense in her womb as she rehashed details. Linda cursed softly, urging her not to yield. That night, Isabella didn't sleep. She paced the bedroom, missing Damian's comforting presence. She recalled how he used to champion underdogs in philanthropic efforts. If he were alive, he'd never let the board push her around. She resolved to move faster with Julian's plan. The next board meeting was days away. She'd present the Berlin rescue blueprint then. If the board tried to overshadow her, so be it. She'd fight for her child's rightful inheritance. Because if she allowed them to quell her, all that Damian built might be lost to corporate greed. The upcoming board meeting weighed heavily on Isabella. She dreaded stepping into that mahogany-walled conference room, facing steely-eyed veterans who saw her pregnancy as weakness. But with Julian's discreet help, she felt armed with data and a coherent strategy for Berlin. They decided on an unusual approach. Julian would remain hidden from official involvement. Instead, he guided her from behind the scenes, crafting a polished presentation that Isabella could deliver as if it were her own. That way, it wouldn't appear as though Astor International had direct influence over Hawthorne Capital. The subterfuge was risky if discovered. It might spark accusations of collusion, but it was their best chance to outmaneuver the board's intimidation tactics. In the penthouse library, papers and slides were strewn across the massive table. Isabella practiced her talking points while Julian offered feedback via phone. Occasionally, she caught an unexpected warmth in his voice. He'd compliment her phrasing or her conviction. He confessed his admiration for her resilience, juggling grief, pregnancy, and corporate battles. She'd blush, reminding herself to maintain professional boundaries. On the morning of the meeting, she arrived at Hawthorne Capital's top floor, her black pumps clicking on polished floors. Roderick Vale and the other members, Estelle Stanton, Gregory Baines, and Hugo Martin, already assembled. Edgar Rosenblum was also present, though he was strictly the estate lawyer, not a voting board member. The atmosphere felt tense. After some perfunctory formalities, they moved to new business. Isabella cleared her throat. "I'd like to address the rumors about the Berlin real estate investment. We have data to confirm potential risk, but also a path to salvage it." She launched into the meticulously crafted presentation, referencing charts and financial metrics. She outlined a repurposing plan for the property, new capital infusion, and the synergy with local government incentives for tech companies. The board members exchanged glances. Vale's expression darkened, but others looked intrigued by the thoroughness of her analysis. Halfway through, Estelle Stanton interrupted, her tone haughty. "And just how did you come by this plan, Mrs. Hawthorne? You're not exactly known for real estate turnarounds." Isabella maintained composure. "I've consulted with specialists. As a principal shareholder, I have the right to ensure transparency. I want us to salvage this investment rather than hide it." A murmur rippled through the room. Baines, who typically sided with Vale, scratched his chin thoughtfully. This might actually be workable, he admitted. Vale's jaw tightened, but he couldn't outright dismiss the logic. The plan was too coherent to simply reject without reason. The tension rose when Isabella insisted on immediate action. I propose we vote to allocate a bridging fund for the Berlin rebranding. Also, I'd like to see a new committee formed to oversee it, one that I will personally sit on. Vale bristled. We have existing committees. With all due respect, you're not exactly an expert to lead such an initiative. She stared him down, her voice unwavering. I might not be an expert, but I'm Damian Hawthorne's widow, and I hold a significant share. If the board refuses to take decisive steps, I can call for an extraordinary shareholder meeting. Do we really want that public spectacle? A hush fell. She had them cornered, threatening to escalate beyond their cozy circle. Vale glared, but the others recognized a losing battle. They grudgingly agreed to proceed with the plan. A formal vote was taken, passing narrowly. Isabella breathed an internal sigh of relief, though her outward expression remained calm. She'd achieved a victory, albeit a fragile one. As the meeting ended, Vale approached her, voice low with simmering anger. "Don't think this is over, Mrs. Hawthorne. We'll see how long you can keep up this charade, and watch out if you're calling on Astor's help behind the scenes." His words sent a chill down her spine. She realized he might suspect her collaboration with Julian. For now, she'd secured a partial triumph, but in the underbelly of high finance, resentments festered. She hurried home to share the news with Julian, hoping that the board's grudging concession would buy her time enough to deliver a successful turnaround and secure her child's inheritance for good. The weeks after the board meeting brought a cautious optimism to Isabella's life. The newly formed Berlin Oversight Committee began its work, and thanks to her unwavering push, they had started implementing the rebranding strategy. Reports showed early signs that potential tenants were intrigued by the idea of a modernized tech hub. Morale within Hawthorne Capital improved slightly. Meanwhile, Isabella's pregnancy advanced to the point where her child's kicks became stronger. Each movement reminded her that every sacrifice, every stressful confrontation served a higher purpose, preserving a future for the next Hawthorne heir. She found herself gazing at her ultrasound images, longing to tell the unborn baby about their father's legacy, and also about the unexpected allies who stepped in to preserve it. One evening, she invited Linda Greenwood over to celebrate these small victories with a home-cooked meal. Linda teased that she rarely got to see Isabella's domestic side. Over plates of pasta, they toasted with non-alcoholic sparkling cider. Linda asked slyly about Julian. "He's been an essential help, yes?" A faint blush tinged Isabella's cheeks. "He is. I'm grateful. Without him, I wouldn't have known where to begin with that Berlin fiasco." Linda grinned. "I sense there's more than just business synergy. He obviously respects you, and you two are forging a closeness, right?" Isabella's heart fluttered with a confusing swirl of emotions. She adored that Julian treated her as an equal in the corporate sphere, offering guidance without condescension. Yet, she reminded herself she was still grieving. The thought of romantic entanglement, so soon after Damian's death, felt disloyal. "He's a friend," she said quietly. "That's all. I can't think about anything else right now." Linda nodded, letting the subject rest. But Isabella sensed the question wouldn't vanish easily, especially as tabloids continued spinning rumors about a possible relationship. She read a gossip piece labeling her the Black Widow of Manhattan, forging new alliances with Playboy CEOs. The vile portrayal enraged her, but she refused to dignify it with a response. The next morning, Isabella had a routine prenatal checkup. Since Linda was busy, she resolved to go alone, nervous but determined. As she approached the clinic, paparazzi swarmed. "Mrs. Hawthorne, is it true you're living with Julian Astor? When are you announcing the baby's father?" She pushed through them, heart pounding, refusing to respond. Inside the clinic, she collapsed in relief. The ultrasound technician began the exam, and the baby's heartbeat filled the room, a soothing, rhythmic reminder that life pulsed on. Tears of gratitude welled. This child was her anchor, her reason to fight on, no matter the storms of rumor or corporate sabotage. Afterward, stepping outside, she braced for more paparazzi. Instead, a black town car pulled up. The window rolled down, revealing Julian's concerned face. "I heard they were mobbing you," he said softly. "Hop in, I'll give you a ride home." Her tension eased. Climbing in, she thanked him, ignoring the flash of cameras catching her stepping into Astor's vehicle. The ride was mostly quiet. She clutched the ultrasound images as though they were precious gems. At her building, he gently touched her arm. "Keep me updated on the baby's progress, all right? And the Berlin project, too." She mustered a small smile. "Thank you, Julian, truly." In that moment, she realized how comforting it felt to have someone else care so explicitly for her well-being. If only the rest of the world wouldn't twist the story. But for now, she'd accept that sometimes a helping hand is just that, a lifeline in a storm. The initial successes in revamping the Berlin property turned out to be short-lived. A few prospective tenants that had expressed interest backed out without warning, citing concerns about Hawthorne Capital's internal power struggle. Rumors circulated that certain board members might sabotage the project for their own reasons, like Roderick Vale, who might have wanted to push the asset into default to scoop it up through a side arrangement. When Isabella learned of these defections, her heart sank. She realized she had to galvanize the board's support once again, or risk letting the Berlin fiasco re-escalate. But the board's next meeting was weeks away, and she worried time was slipping. On a rainy afternoon, she convened a small meeting in her penthouse. Attending were Linda Greenwood, Edgar Rosenblum, and two sympathetic mid-level executives from Hawthorne Capital. They discussed strategies to reassure tenants and prove that the Berlin hub would be stable. Edgar mentioned that if the board didn't unify soon, the negative press might cripple share value. Then Edgar dropped a bombshell. Roderick Vale is rumored to be courting a hostile takeover from an international conglomerate. They might be planning to forcibly buy out a controlling portion of Hawthorne shares if the price dips enough. If that happens, your child's inheritance could be drastically reduced or overshadowed. A chill ran down Isabella's spine. She recalled Vale's smirk, how he'd threatened her to step aside. This must be his endgame, undermining the Berlin project to sink the stock, then inviting an outside buyer. She refused to let that stand, but how could she block a takeover? Linda suggested a strong public statement, reaffirming leadership under Isabella. But the media hostility remained intense. Any mention of Julian Astor would set off a new wave of rumors. Edgar proposed they partner with a reliable outside investor to quickly boost confidence. The question was, who? Late that evening, Isabella found herself texting Julian again. She laid out the predicament, the possibility of a hostile takeover. Julian responded within minutes, "Let's talk. We may have a solution." They met privately in one of Astor International's smaller conference rooms after hours. The stark, modern space was devoid of prying eyes. Julian explained that he could infuse strategic capital into the Berlin property, thus reassuring tenants that the project had backing from a stable source. In exchange, he'd get a minority stake in that single asset, not the entire company. This arrangement might protect Hawthorne Capital from a broader hostile buyout by stabilizing its main vulnerability. Isabella recognized the brilliance of the move. By ring-fencing the Berlin property with Astor's partial investment, Vale's sabotage plan would be undermined. But she also worried about fueling rumors that she was selling out to Julian. Still, with no better option, she swallowed her pride. "If you do this, you must keep my involvement professional. The tabloids are already speculating too much," she pleaded. Julian nodded solemnly. "Of course, it's purely a property-level deal. The board can't accuse you of letting me seize Hawthorne Capital overall." He paused, gaze sympathetic. "I do worry about the toll on you. All this stress can't be good for the baby." She forced a soft smile, one step at a time. "If this saves the child's inheritance, it's worth it." They hammered out details until midnight, forging an arrangement that would be pitched to the board as an urgent measure. Isabella left the building, exhausted but determined. For the sake of her unborn child, she had to quell Vale's manipulations. She prayed the board would accept the Astor infusion, despite their distrust. Driving home, she felt the baby stir, a reassuring nudge from within. She whispered to the empty car, "We're almost there. I won't let them tear down everything your father built." Yet, the looming threat of more boardroom battles weighed heavily. She sensed a final confrontation with Vale might be an inevitable one that could break the fragile alliances she'd managed to form. The day of the next board meeting arrived, overshadowed by tension thicker than a storm cloud. Word had leaked that Isabella intended to propose a partial partnership with Astor International for the Berlin property, stoking suspicion among certain members. She recognized Vale's scheme. If he could turn enough of the board against her, they might block the deal, leaving the property vulnerable to the rumored hostile bidder. Nerves fluttered in her stomach as she entered the conference room. She was heavily pregnant now, her belly a visible symbol of the future she fought for. Vale, Stanton, Baines, Martin, and the rest eyed her in stony silence. Edgar Rosenblum stood quietly in the corner, offering moral support. Isabella took her seat at the head of the table, determined not to show fear. She launched into a concise overview. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Berlin property remains our greatest liability. We must reassure potential tenants and investors, or risk letting it drag our entire portfolio down. I've secured an offer from Astor International to invest a minority stake, strictly limited to that asset. This injection would fund the final renovations, marketing, and technology upgrades to make the hub appealing." Vale leaned back, arms crossed. "So you're effectively handing our prime real estate to an external competitor?" Isabella met his gaze calmly. "Not handing over selling a minority slice for immediate capital. The property remains under Hawthorne's control. In return, we get Astor's brand credibility. Tenants will see a stable backing. That quells the fear of meltdown." Stanton sniffed. "And what if Astor uses that foothold to eventually expand into the rest of Hawthorne Capital?" "We can't trust him." Isabella exhaled slowly. "The contract is asset-specific, giving them no claim on the rest of the company. It's standard in real estate. Meanwhile, if we do nothing, we risk a stealth takeover by other less scrupulous entities. I suspect some board members are already in advanced talks with those outsiders." Her pointed glare landed on Vale, who glowered but said nothing. Baines coughed, shifting in his seat. "I must admit, if we let that property tank, our share price could plunge. That sets us up for the exact scenario Miss S. Hawthorne warns about. Even if I personally dislike the idea of outside capital, this might be the lesser evil." A tense debate followed. Vale tried spinning doomsday scenarios about Astor's hidden agenda. But with each of his objections, Isabella countered with carefully prepared data. She concluded with a direct appeal. "As Damian Hawthorne's widow and majority shareholder, I'm endorsing this measure. We either act or watch the brand degrade further. My unborn child deserves a stable inheritance, and you all share a fiduciary duty to preserve the company." Faced with her unwavering stance and the logic of the deal, the board eventually bowed to a vote. The measure passed by a slim margin, 6-4. Isabella breathed relief. Vale's expression twisted with frustration, though he plastered on a polite facade, congratulating her in clipped tones. After the meeting, a few members privately approached her, expressing gratitude that she'd found a solution. Others, like Estelle Stanton, remained frosty, but admitted the outcome could be a net positive if it stabilized Berlin. Edgar Rosenblum quietly told her, "You did well. Damian would be proud." Vale lingered, confronting her in the corridor. "You think you've won? I have my eye on you, Mrs. Hawthorne, and on Astor. If your little plan backfires, we'll make sure you lose everything." Isabella steadied herself, meeting his glare. "Then pray it succeeds, Mr. Vale, because if Hawthorne Capital goes down, none of us benefit. And I won't let that happen." She turned on her heel, heart racing. She knew Vale's threats might continue, but at least for now, she'd secured a lifeline for the company. Heading home, she texted Julian. The board approved. "Thank you," he replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. "Plus, take care of yourself and the baby." She found herself smiling at the small note of personal concern. Progress was made, though tensions still simmered beneath. She only hoped she could hold everything together long enough to welcome her child into a stabilized empire and a future free of conspiracies. A few weeks later, the partial investment deal with Astor International was finalized. Papers were signed, attorneys filed the necessary documents, and the Berlin hub's renovation resumed with renewed vigor. Potential tenants who had been nervous saw the strategic partnership as a mark of stability, and inquiries surged. Isabella breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed she had snatched victory from the jaws of corporate sabotage. Even the tabloids toned down their negativity, shifting attention to other celebrity dramas. Nonetheless, Roderick Vale lurked in the background, occasionally shooting her baleful glances in board discussions. She suspected he was licking his wounds, biding time for another power play. But for now, she focused on ensuring the project delivered results. Amid the corporate bustle, her pregnancy advanced into the final trimester. Each day, her unborn child's kicks reminded her that she wouldn't be alone for much longer. She arranged a small baby shower with Linda, ignoring the paparazzi's continued interest. She found gentle comfort in shopping for baby essentials, cribs, onesies, plush toys, though she felt a pang each time she imagined Damian absent from these milestones. She also made one final, deeply emotional decision to hold a memorial event celebrating Damian's philanthropic achievements, culminating in the unveiling of a foundation wing at a local children's hospital. She wanted her child to know that Damian had left a mark of generosity on the world. Planning the event proved cathartic as she poured her sorrow into something constructive. The day of the memorial arrived, a crisp spring morning. Dozens of philanthropic leaders, charity beneficiaries and friends gathered in the hospital's gleaming auditorium. Giant portraits of Damian smiling, full of life, flanked the stage. Isabella, wearing a flowing pastel dress that accommodated her pregnant belly, spoke from the lectern about her husband's legacy. Damian believed in giving back to the vulnerable. He taught me that wealth is a tool, not a trophy. Today, we honor that vision for future generations. Tears glistened as she recalled personal anecdotes of his kindness. The crowd gave a standing ovation. Once the formalities ended, many approached with heartfelt condolences. She recognized a few from the Hawthorne board, who offered polite remarks. Linda stood close, offering moral support. Julian arrived quietly, not wanting to overshadow the event. He gave her a solemn nod from across the room, an unspoken message of solidarity. Later, standing in the hospital's newly dedicated wing, Isabella read the plaque, the Damian Hawthorne Pediatric Unit, in memory of a philanthropist whose generosity knew no bounds. She felt the baby stir. A wave of grief and acceptance washed over her. She whispered, "I miss you. directed at the memory of her husband, feeling a pang that her child would never meet him. But a sense of closure enveloped her, too. She had fought to keep his philanthropic spirit alive. That evening, she visited his grave for the first time since the funeral. Clutching a small bouquet of roses, she knelt on the soft grass, belly pressing against her coat. "Damian, I'm trying my best," she murmured. "Our child will be here soon. I hope I've honored you well. And I hope you'd understand the choices I've made accepting help from those I never expected. This world is harsh, but we're making it through." The breeze whispered around her, a gentle hush that felt like a fleeting embrace. In that moment, she released the final vestiges of guilt, realizing that forging new friendships, even with someone like Julian Astor, didn't mean betraying Damian's memory. It meant continuing the Hawthorne legacy in a new era for the sake of the life growing within her. As the Berlin hub approached completion, excitement rippled among Hawthorne Capital's ranks. The property's rebranding was nearly done, and major tech tenants were signing leases. Even the board members who once opposed Isabella grudgingly admitted her strategy had proven effective. Share prices stabilized, and talk of a hostile takeover dissipated. For a fleeting moment, it seemed peace reigned in the corporate domain. But peace in Isabella's personal world was shaken one night when she awoke to sharp pains rippling through her abdomen. At first, she dismissed them as Braxton Hicks contractions, false alarms, often accompanying late pregnancy. But the pains intensified, and she realized she might be going into early labor 2 weeks before her due date. Heart pounding, she called Linda, who rushed over in the wee hours. They headed to the hospital. Paparazzi nowhere to be found for once, thanks to the hush of midnight streets. There, doctors confirmed she was indeed in labor. Isabella's pulse spiked with both excitement and anxiety. She had prepared for this, though the knowledge she'd experience it without Damian weighed heavily. As the contractions escalated, Linda stayed by her side, offering sips of ice water and holding her hand through each wave of pain. Edgar Rosenblum texted politely, wishing her well from afar. She almost laughed at the comedic image of her estate lawyer pacing in a tux at home. Then, a few hours later, another visitor arrived unexpectedly. Julian. Linda had apparently texted him in a panic, not knowing who else might come to support Isabella. Julian greeted her gently, worry etched on his features. "I hope you don't mind," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right." The look in his eyes spoke of genuine concern, not just business alliances. Isabella, panting through another contraction, nodded. She was too pained to speak, but appreciated his presence. The labor stretched on, a slow, intense process lasting into dawn. Isabella's body trembled with exhaustion, yet she clung to the memory of her vow to protect this child's future. Linda offered emotional support, while Julian stepped out to arrange anything the staff needed. The pain reached a crescendo, and doctors urged her to push. She cried out, tears streaming, arms shaking. In that haze of agony, she felt an unexpected calm wash over her like Damian's spirit hovered, reassuring her. Summoning the last reserves of strength, she bore down. At 7:14 a.m., a sharp, newborn cry shattered the tension. Relief swept through the room. The doctor announced, "It's a boy," as they placed the tiny infant in Isabella's arms. Overcome by emotion, she sobbed quietly, pressing her forehead against her son's delicate head. He wriggled, eyes still shut, lungs heaving. Linda cheered, tears glistening. The entire room felt suffused with gratitude. Julian lingered near the doorway, eyes shining with something akin to awe. He retreated quietly, not wanting to intrude on this deeply personal moment. Isabella cradled the baby, absorbing the magnitude of his existence, an extension of Damian, a living testament that life endures. "We did it," she murmured, tears of joy mingling with sorrow. She decided to name him Damian Edward Hawthorne, paying homage to his father but adjusting the spelling slightly, so he had his own identity. As the medical team performed routine checks, Isabella dozed off in exhausted bliss. Linda stepped out to call close friends. Meanwhile, Julian found himself alone in the corridor, replaying the piercing cry of the newborn in his mind. He realized how deeply invested he'd become in Isabella's fate, once purely a professional courtesy, now entwined with genuine care. That day, in a quiet hospital room, a new chapter began. Hawthorne's heir had arrived, and with him a chance for Isabella to fully reclaim her life from the shadows of sorrow. She drifted into sleep, baby in her arms, heart brimming with equal parts relief and an unspoken wonder at what the future might hold. After baby Damian Edward's birth, a wave of congratulations poured in from around Manhattan's upper crust. Bouquets, plush toys, and well-wishes crammed Isabella's hospital suite. Even some board members like Estelle Stanton sent polite flowers, if only to maintain appearances. Roderick Vale remained conspicuously silent. Once Isabella returned home to the penthouse with her son, she experienced the reality of motherhood, sleepless nights, constant feeding, and an unbreakable bond with the tiny infant. Every time she gazed into Damian's dark eyes, she felt love and sorrow intermingled, a reminder that his father would never hold him. But she also recognized an immense responsibility. She was no longer just safeguarding her late husband's empire, she was forging a stable future for Damian, the rightful heir of the Hawthorne name. The Berlin project soon reaped tangible results. A major tech firm announced they'd lease multiple floors, citing the property's prime location and improved facilities. Media outlets pivoted to praising Isabella's leadership. Widow to warrior, how Isabella Hawthorne secured her son's inheritance, read one flattering headline. She disliked the sensational framing, but appreciated the renewed trust in Hawthorne Capital's direction. During a quiet lunch, Linda teased that Isabella's postpartum glow also had a certain Julian factor. But Isabella shrugged off suggestions that she and Julian were more than friends. She admitted he was an invaluable ally, and yes, she felt a special gratitude for his unwavering presence. However, in her heart, she still grieved Damian. It seemed too soon to decipher the shifting emotions swirling between her and Julian. Instead, she poured her energy into being a mother and CEO figure. A month after Damian's birth, she convened a special shareholder meeting to reveal updated financials. The Berlin rebound, combined with a few philanthropic angles that attracted positive press, boosted Hawthorne Capital's market standing. The meeting ended with applause, a stark contrast to the dismissive attitudes she once faced. Even Vale, scowling in the corner, had to concede that her strategy worked. In her closing remarks, Isabella made a poignant statement. Damian believed in building a legacy not just of wealth, but of compassion. We honor him by ensuring Hawthorne Capital remains a force for good. My son, Damian Edward, will inherit more than money. He'll inherit a vision of generosity and progress. The audience responded with a standing ovation. As she stepped off the podium, Edgar Rosenblum greeted her with a beaming grin. "You did it," he whispered. "You're truly the matriarch of Hawthorne now." That night, she returned to the penthouse, exhausted but proud. The baby cooed in his bassinet, and she picked him up, nuzzling his soft cheek. She found solace in the knowledge that, for the moment, crisis had passed. No more overshadowing sabotage or scandal. Vale was subdued. The Astor partnership thrived discreetly, fulfilling its role as a stabilizing force. A gentle knock on the door broke her reverie. It was Julian, carrying a small gift bag. "I just wanted to personally congratulate you on the shareholder meeting success," he said quietly. She invited him in, offering a seat near Damian's bassinet. He handed her the bag, containing a baby onesie embroidered with a subtle monogram, DEH. Touched. She blinked back tears. "Julian, that's so thoughtful," he shrugged, a faint smile. "You and your son deserve something special. I see how tirelessly you've worked to keep Hawthorne afloat. You've proven you're more than capable." Their eyes locked, a moment of unspoken emotion passing between them. The hush of the penthouse magnified the beat of their hearts. But just then, Damian let out a soft wail, reminding them both of immediate priorities. Isabella gently soothed the baby, feeling the closeness slip into a warm gratitude rather than romantic tension. She realized how entangled their lives had become, but also that she wasn't yet ready for anything beyond the present. As Julian prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Whenever you need me professionally or personally, I'm here, Isabella," he murmured. She nodded, offering a genuine smile. The future lay wide open. For now, she had found contentment in her son's cherubic face, her company's newfound stability, and the enduring memory of Damian. Any possibility with Julian, if it existed, could wait until her heart was ready to embrace life's next chapter. Isabella Hawthorne's journey began in a moment of unimaginable sorrow, the sudden loss of her billionaire husband. Despite the heartbreak, she fought tirelessly to honor Damian's legacy and protect the future of their unborn child. When boardroom conspiracies and financial turmoil threatened to dismantle Hawthorne Capital, an unexpected ally emerged in the form of CEO Julian Astor. Together, they navigated ruthless business politics, media scandals, and personal grief, forging an unbreakable partnership that revived her husband's empire and secured a future for her newborn son, Damian Edward. Ultimately, Isabella discovered that true strength can blossom from the deepest pain. While she remains devoted to preserving Damian's memory, she's open to whatever life may offer next, including a profound bond with a man who proved that loyalty and compassion can transcend power. If this emotional tale resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more dramatic, real-life, inspired fiction. Your support fuels stories that celebrate resilience, healing, and the power of hope.